On this edition of Southern Newsweek, a Dunedin man has been found guilty of beating a neighbour to death. Greymouse fishing industry is awash with tuna destined for the international market. And sticking with things fishy, the Bluff Oyster season has opened. Kia ora, I'm Melissa Barton. A man who beat a nearby resident to death with a cricket bat has been found guilty of murder. The victims' families say they will continue to feel pain and suffering into the future.
So Brent was brutally taken from us just over 2 years ago. His blood, which was spilled in an unjust death, has cried out to be avenged ever since. The actions of the defendant were callous, barbaric and cruel, and have ripped our lives apart. We as a family, which includes Brent's 3 precious children, will never get over this. Our wombs will weep forever.
The family of murder victim Brent Bacon say they will continue to feel pain and suffering after a jury took only an hour to find 39-year-old John Collins guilty of murdering a friendly nearby resident.
Brent was funny, intelligent, a funny, intelligent, loyal soul. He saw the best in everyone and had an intense desire to connect with others. He sought and craved people, love and meaning in his life. Brent was our glue. He made our family stronger. His presence will be sorely missed forever.
Crown Prosecutor Richard Smith says forensic evidence showed that Bacon was hit on the head with a cricket bat while sitting on a couch and ended up on the floor with Collins continuing to rain blows down on his head. Bacon's body was dumped at Steep Hill Road, just off State Highway 1, north of Dunedin. It was Bacon's brother-in-law who first discovered the blood-spattered crime scene in Bacon's house, with him having to inform the family of what seemed to have happened.
The trickiest part was, of course, having to tell Leah, because it was very, very clear to me, upon seeing what I'd seen, what had happened. Brent's genitals were obviously amongst it all, and it was pretty telling. Collins
will be sentenced in May and is possibly set to spend the rest of his life in prison. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Greymouse Port has been busy with fishing boats, bringing in their catch during the tuna season. Once landed, the fully loaded bins are transported from the harbour up to Motueka and then on to Europe.
Since mid-January, Greymouth Port has been bustling with fishing boats coming and going as they drop off the tuna they've caught in the deep water trenches in the Tasman Sea.
What makes the West Coast so special is the fish just love the tropical areas, i.e. the Hokitika Trench, the Cook Canyon or in around Vianet. Where the water dives very deeply, where they tend to congregate above those areas and look for food.
Despite yellow-finned tuna being classed as a near-threatened species with a declining population, fishing them is a big business for the Nelson-based firm Tallies, which contracts dozens of boats to scoop up tuna in New Zealand's waters every summer.
Yeah, so currently we're running around about 45 boats unloading to us. They range in areas from Bluff all the way up to the far north. We've got boats from the east coast of the North Island, likes of Hohora, Kaitaia, and around that Wanganui as well. So they range from quite a large area all the way down here to the land and to us.
To avoid the fish from spoiling, there's a chain of cool stores to keep these fish fresh on their final journey to the canneries and dinner tables of Europe.
So what it is, our boys will hop on board, they'll unload the fish, remove any waste ice, etc. We'll put it into bins. It goes into our chiller for storage for around about 2 or 3 hours before a truck will turn up. We then load the truck up, it'll drive all the way to Motueka, and then it goes into what's called a brine tank, which is just a large fluid tank which gets the fish right down to a temperature of minus 20 degrees. And then from there it's loaded in containers and then shipped overseas, mostly into Europe at this stage. But all in all, around about a 48-hour process to get it into the container.
Each year, about 500,000 tonnes of yellow-finned tuna are fished up from the western and central Pacific Ocean. In Greymouth, the South Today.
a southern seafood processing plant, is a hive of activity as the Bluff oyster season opens. In years gone by, the industry has been plagued by a number of factors, but an insider says this season is shaping up well.
Don't try this at home, especially this fast. These expert oyster shuckers are flat out, processing the first catch of the 2021 Bluff oyster season.
So yesterday, the 1st of March, the first day the boats are allowed to go to sea, so boats were out yesterday and we're just doing our first processing today for the new season.
Barnes Wild Bluff Oysters General Manager Graham Wright says as many as 36,000 of the sought-after shellfish are being relieved of their shells and packed into bottles.
We've probably got somewhere at about, I don't know, as a wild guess, probably 3,000 dozen or something like that probably.
Destined for distribution as soon as possible. But he says southern fans get the first crop.
Certainly for the first couple of days, you know, the bulk of them will sold in Southland, I guess, South Otago, but we'll certainly get some away in the couriers, limited stocks away tonight, and then, you know, as days go by, we'll get more up north.
In recent years, the Bonamia osterae parasite took a huge toll on the season, with beds having to be ripped out. Wright says last year's season wasn't affected by that plague, but the global pandemic did hit the season.
And COVID obviously was slowed us down for a wee while, but yeah, we were done sort of early August last year, so we'll just see what happens this year.
He says Barnes Wild Bluff Oysters have employed a few new staff this year, but he describes the workforce as stable and loyal. The Bluff oyster season is regulated by the government and runs from March the 1st until August 31st. In Bluff, the South Today.
A record number of runners turned up to this year's clock tower race. Runners have to sprint around the University of Otago Registry building before the clock chimes 12.
Quite a crowd of runners turned up to try and beat the bells of the University Clock Tower, sprinting a circuit around the registry building. First held in the 1980s, the event was brought back to life by Jared Monk 3 years ago, and he's seen it grow in that time.
3 years ago now we had 10 or so that first year, and we had about almost 50 today. So it's been going strength to strength really, so it's really cool.
The overall winner was John Gerber with a time of just under 49 seconds, and it was his partner Eliza Meakin who won the women's division, coming in just 6 seconds later.
They're dating as well, so that's an unfair team advantage. He obviously gave her the tips of how to win. So
Monk is close to finishing his studies in dentistry and admits he might not be around to keep on administrating the event in future years.
At this stage, yeah, it's looking like I'll be passing the torch on, and so that's why I've been setting up a really good sort of portfolio and a how-to to make sure this event can run past my tenure here.
The event's prizes rely on a number of sponsors, which takes some organising, but he's hoping the people taking over won't find administrating the event too onerous.
It's not too hard to organise things remotely these days, a lot of phone calls and emails, so just going to make sure someone's here on the day to set things up. I was down here about 8 o'clock this morning putting cones out, getting cars off the causeway here and stuff like that. So
the race is inspired by the Academy Award-winning British film Chariots of Fire, depicting the lead up to the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Still to come on this edition of Southern Newsweek. Artists from Dunedin's Polish Society are showing their colours, and a Dunedin-based expert answers the questions about life on Mars. So catch this and more after the break. Welcome back. An exhibition of work by Dunedin-based Polish artists is set to show how much Polish immigrants love their adopted homeland. The display in the city's community gallery is also set to raise funds for a significant milestone of the Polish culture in Otago.
Taking pride of place. Dunedin artist Maria Kemp's painting From Dunedin with Love is lending its name to the exhibition being set up at Dunedin's community gallery. greatly pleasing the artist.
Oh, this was an incredible surprise because it's complete coincidence that we name our exhibition, and that's why we put that painting right there in the front, because it's a wonderful painting, and just this shows our exhibition. Happy students, actually.
The exhibition is intended to reflect the love Polish immigrants such as her feel for their adopted home. Organiser Eva Rosecka-Pollard says nearly all of the local artists they contacted have generously provided artworks to be sold.
It was overwhelming. We've got 35 artists, and out of 40 something that we contacted, and we've got 84 paintings.
Organisers are taking a commission from the sale of works in the exhibition, which are set to go towards Polish Heritage Otago's plans to celebrate 150 years of Polish settlement in Otago.
They came here on a Vogel scheme, and the settlers in Otago built the railways. They were specially recruited to build the railways. Then they settled in Waihola and Allenton and farmed there. So they arrived in December 1872. So this is going to be a big anniversary, and we're going to celebrate that. So we need the funds, obviously, for that.
The exhibition From Dunedin with Love runs at Dunedin's Community Gallery until mid next week. In Dunedin, the South Today.
A Dunedin geology researcher says Mars is not a good choice for human settlement. Professor James Scott says there are many things about the red planet which make it unsuitable for colonisation.
University of Otago geology professor James Scott has a number of Mars rocks in his collection. They weren't brought back from the red planet by spacecraft, but fell to Earth after being ejected from the surface of Mars during some of the many asteroid impacts the planet has incurred. Professor Scott says he found his first tiny sliver of Mars while on holiday near Christchurch.
The first Martian rock I ever found was in a gem store in Akaroa. It was a complete surprise. I'd gone into the store and there was a little cabinet there that said meteorites, and I thought, oh, it can't be. And there was a little box in there that said fragment of Mars.
He knows for certain it's a Mars rock by the tiny bubbles of Martian air trapped inside.
It's actually quite simple. The Martian atmosphere composition is known from landers and orbiters there. And then when these meteorites leave the Martian surface, they actually are a little bit liquid, a little bit molten, and so they trap bubbles of atmosphere and Martian atmosphere in them. That then travels through space, and then they can be analysed on Earth, and it shows a one-to-one match with what we know the Martian atmosphere to be.
Scott says there's far more cosmic radiation hitting the Martian surface than on Earth, meaning that life on the red planet is almost impossible. But he believes primitive life could have briefly existed there 3 billion years ago.
Early on in its history, Mars had an atmosphere, and it probably had an ocean, and it definitely had liquid water in the form of lakes. So and the temperature at that time was above freezing as well. So it had the ingredients for life. Whether it had the spark or not is a different question.
And as for people ever living on Mars, Scott says the planet doesn't really suit humans at all.
Mars is unsuitable for life as we know it, for us, partly because the atmosphere is very toxic. It's mostly carbon dioxide, about 95%, which is completely different to Earth's. The temperature is extremely cold. The average temperature is about minus 63 degrees Celsius, and there's a huge daytime range, getting down to almost minus 100 degrees. And we have very little water on the surface. There's ice, but there's not liquid water. And the other thing is that the gravity on Mars is much weaker than it is on Earth, and so for humans we've adapted to Earth's gravity, we're now experiencing Mars the gravity would be much weaker, and as a result we'd have to do considerable exercise to sort of maintain our body mass.
NASA's most recent Mars rover, Perseverance, successfully landed on the surface of Mars 2 weeks ago, and the European Space Agency is set to launch their rover next year. In Dunedin, the South Today.
Typically, university study is a young person's chance to get away from family and find their place in the world. But studying law at the University of Otago isn't going to be a solo pursuit for one Balclutha teen, who's been joined by 2 generations of her family.
Enjoying a sunny day on campus are 18-year-old first-year student Madeleine O'Malley, her mum Sarah and grandfather Noel, who's been to university before, albeit a few years ago.
Enrolling here to start a Masters of Peace and Conflict Studies at the university, where I enrolled 50 years ago, almost to the day, to start my Bachelor of Law degree, which I completed here in 1975.
After completing his legal studies, Noel O'Malley had his own practice in Balclutha, which he's recently sold to enable him to return to study.
And absolutely delighted to be joined on this venture by my daughter Sarah, who's into her second year in law. She's has a degree from this university from some years ago and has been working in the law practice with me and is now pursuing her own studies, and that's great.
There'll be 3 generations of the family attending the University of Otago at the same time. Noel O'Malley says he's immensely proud of Sarah and Madeleine taking up legal studies.
Really excited about that, and this has been, as we got the notion and learned that Madeleine was going to come here and Sarah's going to continue with her studies here, it seemed just absolutely cool that we could all head off this year together.
O'Malley was the first person in his family to go to university, and says there are already multiple lawyers in the family. One can only imagine future debates around the table at Christmas. In Dunedin, the South Today.
After the break on Southern Newsweek, one of New Zealand's top Otago-based rugby players recommits to the game in New Zealand, and Otago Cavalcade riders are getting ready for their annual trek, so see you after the break. Thanks for staying with us. After 10 years playing for the Highlanders, Aaron Smith has signed up for another 2 years. The 32-year-old says the uncertainties about COVID-19 have encouraged him to stay local.
COVID-19 uncertainties have encouraged Aaron Smith to stay in New Zealand and sign up for another 2 years with the Highlanders.
And shifting your whole family, and then the idea of obviously having to come home 2 weeks ISO. I've already done that once. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. It's pretty tough.
Smith has been with the Highlanders for the last 10 years, and despite lucrative offers to play overseas, he's staying in Dunedin to give back to rugby.
I feel really good in my body and my mind around wanting to keep playing rugby, and I wouldn't want to do it anywhere else in New Zealand, so committing here was easy. I was signed for this year anyway, but just wanted that surety for the next 2 or 3 years to be able to just push for whatever's to come.
Smith admits being a bit crazy about maintaining a rigorous training regime, which includes working out on Christmas and New Year's Day. The 32-year-old says he feels like he's in top condition.
I'll be honest, I was talking to my wife the other day and I said I feel better than I did when I was 28 or 27. Just the way I look after my body, the way I eat, the way I live now, it's just, the technology's out there to how to recover better. I put a lot of time into my body training, but I also put a lot of time into my body with recovery around ice, sauna, leg pumps. I do most things. I've got a good routine around recovery.
But he's aware the off-seasons are becoming a challenge as he grows older.
As an older athlete, too, not to have a big break, not to put that weight on that's hard to lose, that Christmas fat or that little bit of chub. And I keep training all year round these days. It's just around the intensity of how hard I push it.
Smith also plays for New Zealand's national team, the All Blacks, with a World Cup in France in 2 years' time on his radar. In Dunedin, the South Today.
More than 1,200 school pupils have taken part in a sports event aimed at increasing participation. Sporting activities on offer range from parkour to bowls and even balloon badminton.
Southern Year 9 to 13 pupils leaping at the chance to try new sports, including parkour, indoor bowls and more. School facilitator Ricky Barker says about 30 schools took part from across Invercargill and its surrounds.
This event is called Connecting Communities. We've got a lot of providers in here today that are showcasing different forms of physical activity in our community and getting all the kids in to see perhaps something they haven't done before, and hopefully post this event they might go and do something new they haven't done and get involved in physical activity.
Sport Southland's Made to Move Invercargill team hosted the event to give young people a taster of a wide variety of sports, with many schools and more than 1,000 pupils taking part.
We've got close to 30 schools in here from across Invercargill and Southland, and about 1,200 students over the 2 days.
Organisers are pleased the event could go ahead this time around. As Barker says, last year's event was cancelled as the COVID-19 pandemic began sweeping across the globe.
Absolutely, and last week obviously we had a bit of a scare around moving to level 2, which would have meant it was cancelled, but thankfully that's been cleared, and we've had a really cool 2 days. Great feedback from teachers, from schools, from students, from providers. We're stoked for how it's all gone.
The Connected Communities event went ahead in the last week of February, before the country went into level 2 COVID-19 restrictions, which limit gathering sizes and have cancelled many events across the nation. In Invercargill, the South Today.
Horse and wagon riders have set off again for another Goldfields Cavalcade. Among the trekkers is a 74-year-old Kurau woman who is travelling the trails for the 25th time, who says she's not too long in the tooth to enjoy long hours in the saddle.
After more than 20 years of trekking through the Otago mountainside, Tyree Hall will head off today on the Tussock Creek Light Harness Trail, starting her 25th cavalcade journey. The Kurau woman will ride the trail with her new horse Sandy, after husband Neil McKerricker pinched her horse Cooper for this year's trail.
Light harness. We're on the Light Harness Tussock Creek Trail, and we're leaving from Round Hill Station up the hick, going over to Hunter Hills, to Wairua, to Invercroy, and then over the Halden Pass to Grays Hills, and then on into Twizel.
Horse says the cavalcade evokes numerous memories for her, from driving 4 Tennessee horses, possums on toilet seats, and the Oamaru Scouts group catering. And though things have changed through the years, and they were no longer roughing it, she says taking part in her 25th cavalcade was still something very special.
This is Copper. Oh, he's bored. This is Copper. My husband rides Copper. I bought him just over a year ago. He's an Arab cross, and that's awful. Yawning. And he's just lovely. He's just an awesome little horse. And this is Sandy, and I've just got her about 6 weeks ago, and she's a wee quarter horse cross, and so she's going to be my ride for the week.
Organisers are expecting about 640 people to take part in this year's ride, using different country trails which all converge in Twizel next weekend. In the Mackenzie Country, the South Today.
And that wraps up this edition of Southern Newsweek. For the latest news from the Southern region, head online to odt.co.nz or follow Channel 39 on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for joining us. Ka kite anō.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.